Good evening everyone, Vanakkam, welcome to VerandaRace, and today's session is all about the discussion of the Hindu editorial of the 28th March. Long time no see, let's start the session. Thorough discussion of the editorial March 28th. The topic is talking and listening. So let us start the session. Students, let me tell you that this session is meant to understand the way Hindu writes editorials, the way Hindu presents editorials. So let us understand the meaning of the sentences in a simpler manner, and also understand the vocabulary that comes while we solve the passage. Okay. So brief as it was, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Delhi on Friday appears to have left behind more questions than answers on its purpose. Okay. So the author says that the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Delhi was very brief, and it appears to have left behind means create an impact, and it has left behind some more questions than answers on its purpose. What was the purpose of the visit? That is still unclear, because it has left behind more questions than answers. That's what the author says. The visit was the first by a senior Chinese official since the military standoff along the line of actual control began in April 2020. Standoff here means the deadlock or the impasse. So there was a military standoff along the LAC that began in April 2020. Deadlock means like this way. There was kind of obstacle between both the parties on both the sides. It was a deadlock situation. So the visit was the first by a Chinese official since the military deadlock along the LAC line of actual control began in April 2020. Since then, despite means in spite of 15 rounds of border commander talks and 8 rounds of meetings of the special working mechanism for consultation and coordination on the Indo-China border, friction area remain, including Patrol Point 15, Demchok and Depsang, where troops have been amassed on both the sides. What it says? Since then, when the deadlock started along the LAC in April 2020, despite 17 rounds of border commander talks, 8 rounds of meetings of the special working mechanism for consultation and coordination, friction areas remain. Still friction areas remain. This is what the author says. This is the main point. Despite 15 rounds of border commander talks, 8 rounds of WMCC, friction areas still remain, including Patrol Point 15, Demchok and Depsang, where troops have been amassed. Amassed means collected on both the sides. It's very easy. However, it appeared that during his meetings separately with NSA Chief Ajit Doval, followed by External Minister S. Jaishankar, Mr. Wang proposed no new mechanism or formulation to break the log jam in those talks. What is the meaning of log jam? Log jam means any obstruction in the talks. Any obstruction is known as log jam. So it appeared that during his meetings, either with NSA Chief Ajit Doval or followed by External Minister S. Jaishankar, Mr. Wang proposed no new mechanism, no new method or formulation to break the obstruction in those talks, as had been the case earlier. Earlier also there had been logjam in the talks. Still, he did not take any new method or formulation to break the logjam, similarly as it had been the case earlier. Instead means in the place of, the Chinese side only repeated that India must put the differences on the border issue. The Chinese side only repeated that India must put the differences on the border issue in the proper place in bilateral relations and revive bilateral talks on all issues. So what China does, Only repeated that India must put all the differences on the border issue and not other things in the proper place in bilateral relationship. So it should keep all the differences on the border issue in a proper place in bilateral relations and revive bilateral means from both the sides, and it must revive the bilateral talks on all issues, like all issues including import, export and other issues like diplomatic issues, not only the army issue, the line of actual control issue, but all issues it should control, it should have a talk on. Now, according to a Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs statement, the suggestion was part of three-step formula. This suggestion that it should keep the differences on border issue in proper place in bilateral relation and revive bilateral talks on all issues. So, the suggestion was a part of three-step formula that included taking a long-term civilizational view on Indo-China ties. First, taking a long-term civilizational view of Indo-China ties. Number two, seeing each other's development as a win-win and cooperating in the multilateral sphere. So what does it mean? First step was taking a long-term civilizational view. Civilizational view means considering the civilization of India and China. So it should have a civilizational view on Indo-China ties. And other is seeing each other's development as win-win. Win-win means both sides win. And cooperating in the multilateral sphere. Multilateral means on all aspects, like not only border talks, but also other aspects like business relation, student exchange or import export, all these issues it should have multilateral sphere, cooperation and a win-win situation. The last point, 2.7 discussed, was a reference to China's turn to host the BRICS summit later this year. So the last point was China referred to that it should host the BRICS summit later this year, which Mr. Wang hoped Mr. Prime Minister Modi would attend, and India's turn to host the SCO and G20 summits next year, where Chinese President Xi Jinping would be among the invitees. So this last point was that the Chinese wanted that the BRICS summit later this year, which will be held in China, Mr. Wang hoped that the Prime Minister Modi would attend it, and India's turn to host the SCO and G20 summits next year should also happen, where Chinese President Xi Jinping would be among the invitees. Okay. However, neither Mr. Wang nor his hosts in the government answered why. Neither Mr. Wang nor his hosts in the government, hosts in the government means the Indian government, answered why if his message did not differ from the past. Why his message did not differ from the past could not be answered by Mr. Wang nor the people who were hosts. Who was the host? India was the host. He was received in Delhi at all. From the past, he was received in Delhi at all. That he was merely in the region visiting Pakistan for an OIC conference, Afghanistan to meet with the Taliban ahead of another conference in Beijing, and Nepal to further bilateral cooperation and infrastructure projects, and decided to drop in does not seem to suffice as a reason when bilateral ties remain at a standstill. Let us understand this. That he means Mr. Wang was merely in the region. Merely means just for the sake of being in the region. Visiting Pakistan for an OIC conference, Afghanistan to meet the Taliban ahead of another conference in Beijing, and Nepal to further means enhance. Further means what? Enhance. Increase bilateral cooperation and infrastructure projects. And he was merely in the region, decided to drop in does not seem to be sufficient reason when bilateral ties remain at a standstill. So whatever reasons he gave, Mr. Wang gave, were not sufficient reason when in a situation when bilateral ties remain at a standstill. Standstill means at a stagnant way, which it does not increase or decrease, or the bilateral ties have no talks that would enhance the bilateral ties. Okay. nor does it explain why the Modi government, nor does it means what? The visit. Explain or the visit, yeah. Nor does it explain why Modi government, which has consistently said it would only hold bilateral talks about resolving the border standoff, departed from this precept to discuss bilateral and international issues. Let us understand this. This visit does not explain why Modi government, which has consistently said it would only hold bilateral talks about resolving the border standoff, and why the Modi government departed. See, this point is not necessary. You can remove this point also from here to here. Why Modi government departed from this precept? Precept means law, to discuss bilateral and international issues. This visit could not explain why Modi government departed from means deviated from or remained far away from this law to discuss bilateral and international issues. Neither side announced Mr. Wang's arrival until his first meetings on Friday. Neither side announced. So neither side means India and China both did not announce. Neither of them announced that Mr. Wang's arrival was going to take place until his first meetings on Friday, indicating that there is something more behind the scenes. So this indicates that when Mr. Wang's visit happened and India and Pakistan neither displayed or announced that Mr. Wang's arrival had taken place, indicates that there is something more behind the scenes. More behind the scenes means there is something fishy or something sinister. It is also possible that his outreach stems from a desire to compare notes on Ukraine. So it is possible that Mr. Wang's outreach means his visit stems from means originates from a desire to compare notes on Ukraine, where India and China find themselves at odds with the Western sanctions regime that threatens to isolate Russia and split global transactions into dollar versus non-dollar system. It's very simple. So it seems that his visit originates from a desire to compare exchange of dialogues. Notes means exchange of dialogues, where India and China both find themselves at odds. At odds means what? At a difficult position with the Western sanctions regime. The Western sanctions regime means the sanctions that are put on Russia by the Western countries, NATO and other Quad countries. Okay, and they threaten to isolate Russia and split global transaction into dollar versus non-dollar system, while also finding themselves not entirely comfortable with Mr. Putin's action. So these Western countries are not comfortable with Putin's action, and also they want that through their sanctions regime, they want to threaten and isolate Russia and split global transaction into dollar versus non-dollar system. So irrespective of the fact that any common understanding on the other issues, however, New Delhi and Beijing cannot simply pick up the threads of their conversation until there is a full understanding of the events since April 2020. So regardless of any common understanding on other issues, means irrespective of the fact that there is no common understanding on other issues, however, New Delhi and Beijing cannot simply pick up the threads. Pick up the threads means cannot recall memories or cannot put up the points of their conversation until there is a full understanding of events since April 2020 when the last visit took place, and the demobilization by the PLA, People's Liberation Army. So and the demobilization means the order to stop the military base, stop the defense by the PLA, followed by the disengagement of troops is completed. So what does it says? Regardless of any common understanding of other issues, however, New Delhi and Beijing cannot simply pick up the threads of their pick up the threads means initiate into a conversation until there is full understanding of events since April 2020. And the demobilization means asking the army to stop. by the PLA followed by the disengagement of troops is completed. So only when the demobilization of PLA happens and the disengagement means retreating the army, retreating the defense, asking the defense to come back of the troops is completed, then only can there be a good conversation between India and China. Okay. So this is what the passage is all about. I hope you enjoyed the passage a lot. Thank you so much for being with me. Thanks a lot.